would ever believe that Adam Waterman is Aquaman? It's Golden Age Aquaman time. Yes, the Golden and Silver Age Aquaman were different. For the most part, it was in subtle ways, but there was one rather large difference, and that was their origin. And the original version was largely supplanted by the Silver Age version, even if that transition was not as abrupt as with some other characters. I think it's fascinating and just fun to talk about Aquaman, so let's do it. I'm Sash, this is Casually Comics, and it's Aquaman time. When you're talking about Aquaman, sometimes another Golden Age sea-based character springs to mind, and that's Namor, the Submariner. Gotta give him his whole title. Namor did debut before Aquaman, his first published appearance being in Marvel Comics #1 in 1939. He was created by Bill Everett. I say first published appearance because he was meant to appear somewhere else, in Motion Picture Funnies, but that didn't end up being published, but the pages are still there. So some feel that that counts as his first appearance, others feel no, it has to be published to count. Aquaman's first debut was in More Fun Comics #73 in 1941, and he was created by Mort Weisinger and Paul Norris. Norris has spoken on the character's origins, and they're fairly perfunctory. There's not much glamorous about the genesis of Aquaman. He stated, "One day when I had brought in a finished script to Murray Boltinoff, I was told that Whit wanted to see me. I stopped in Whit's office. They wanted to start a new feature about a character that lived in the sea. Whit asked me to create the character. That is how Aquaman was born. They told me to do it, and I did." The thing about the Namor and Aquaman comparisons is just because they come from around the same era doesn't mean that those two have the most in common. Namor actually has more in common with the Silver Age version of Aquaman. For a lot of the traits that people recognize about Aquaman, being from Atlantis, a king of Atlantis, telepathic control over sea creatures, those aren't present in the Golden Age version. The first Aquaman story is The Submarine Appears, and it's very much a wartime story, opening right up on a splash page of Aquaman fighting Nazis. Many have heard the legend of Aquaman. They have? This is his first issue. But who will believe so strange a tale? Most amazing of all the secrets of the sea is the story of Aquaman, who like a water god of old, dwells in the dim unknown depths of the ocean, leaping forth to do battle with the evils and injustices of the world we know. Aquaman emerges from the sea to take on a German U-boat. It's attacking a ship carrying refugees and hospital workers just for maximum scum factor. There's a woman holding a baby, the whole 9 yards. Out of the waves leaps a figure of terrible reckoning. I know they want me to feel that he is a figure of terrible reckoning, but those bright colors, they're not doing it. See the sea, my friend. See the sea. Golden Age Aquaman doesn't get out much. Indeed, most of his friends are fish. He's able to rescue the refugees, then he's quite keen to tell his entire life story. "Say man, the sea, from what land are you?" "From no land. My name is Aquaman." I mean, that's not entirely true because he was born, it's fine. Let him tell his story. "But these miracles you've done for us, how did you manage them?" "Well, there's no harm in telling you." I mean, there could be. You don't know that. "The story must start with my father, a famous undersea explorer. If I spoke his name, you would recognize it. My mother died when I was a baby, and he turned to his work of solving the ocean's secrets." Aquaman in this story is essentially aquatic Doc Savage. Doc Savage had been trained since infancy to become the best, a renaissance man in all things, including combat. That origin will be applied to many characters. Years later, you'll see it as a template for Tom Strong, for example. Doc Savage had a really big impact, and it feels like it isn't often discussed all that much, but he's important. So is the Shadow. Now, how they tweaked Doc Savage for Aquaman is as follows. His dad discovered an ancient city, and to study it, built himself an undersea dwelling, and just brought his son along for the ride. Who needs friends? He made himself a watertight home in one of the palaces and lived there, studying the records and devices of the race's marvelous wisdom. From the books and records, he learned ways of teaching me to live under the ocean. These remains of their science show that they possessed wonders the upper world has never known. And never will, because I'm not sharing this. Drawing oxygen from the water and using all the power of the sea to make me wonderfully strong and swift. By training in 100 scientific secrets, I became what you see, a human being who lives and thrives under the water. My son is a true dweller of the deep. His name shall be Aquaman. He looks pretty old here in these panels. What was his father calling him before this? Was he Kratosing it, just calling him boy? "Swim in the ocean, boy." That's all the story. My father died and I carried on his studies in the sea-bottom sea. Now I must go. That got pretty Cliff Notes at the end. Maybe he started to see that guy's eyes glaze over. And then he died, the end. I do like how on this version, the Golden Age version of the costume, the boots have an intense fin-like quality to them. So in this version, Aquaman fights crime on land just cause. There's not really any more motivation than because they want to have some of his ventures tie into things that are happening on land. And because it's the right thing to do. And they don't have people under the ocean in this version of Aquaman right now. So really it's just him and the fish. He needs to see people somewhere. Also, he kicked a Nazi, now he has to punch a Nazi. It's in the rules of 1940s comics. But first he will assault them with atrocious puns. Forth from the waves bursts a terrifying juggernaut of justice. I have oceans of love for you boys. There he is, the man of the sea, run, hide! He's able to punch through metal with his bare hands. One of the most amusing parts of this story is that they try to defeat him by sinking him to the bottom of the ocean. In this sequence, he has to summon his fish friends via distress signal. He cannot communicate telepathically with fish. Whenever he gets them to do something for him, he's shown talking to them. And it's not that he can force them to do it, they seem to just have a good relationship. This will knock your wits out. Hey guys, punch in there. You haven't won yet, you walking fish. I don't know what danger this is, but I throw it back at you. Aquaman's got those gamer reflexes. Whenever a grenade comes at you, just bat it back. Anything. Fireball, energy beam, just bat it back. The closing teaser does call him the Sovereign of the Sea, but this origin gave him no credentials to call himself so. Who is he ruling over? What? Is this abandoned, forgotten city? That's actually pretty depressing. One other thing to note that may seem inconsequential, but actually is a pretty big deal, is that in this story, he has green gloves. But in the next issue of More Fun and going forward, he would have yellow gloves. This is important because the glove color would be one of the ways some people would distinguish between the two different versions of Aquaman during the transition period looking back at them. So a way to determine which stories were taking place with the Golden Age and which with the Silver. Which Earth was it happening on basically, Earth 1 or Earth 2? The thing is, it's not the best barometer because some stories that are clearly Arthur, he has the yellow gloves, but it's still something people try to use as an indicator. And when this version of Aquaman would appear in later eras, which happened a couple of times, he would have the yellow gloves. So it's a bit amusing that in his debut outing, he has the green that would come to be associated with the Silver Age version, which means that it could be even easier to confuse the two. Aquaman would remain a backup for years, first in More Fun comics, until issue 108 in 1946, when the superhero stories were moved out. They moved them over to Adventure Comics so that More Fun comics could become a humor-based comic because the popularity of superheroes was starting to dip. Aquaman joined Adventure Comics in issue 103, and issue 120 saw an addition to this Aquaman formula, because in the other stories he would just go and fight some kind of crime on the sea. But in issue 120, he went to college, and there's a reason I'm telling you this. It's not just because, wow, he's getting an education. This story was also just called Aquaman Goes to College. It was written by Joseph Samichin, with art by Luis Casanueve. Many queer creatures live in the ocean, and no man, not even Aquaman, ruler of the watery realm, who appointed him, knows them all. So the sea sovereign, ooh, love that, sets out to enlarge his knowledge of deep sea life and runs into unexpected action as he leaves the briny deep and becomes a fish out of water when Aquaman goes to college. I like that they have that bathtub there. He doesn't actually need to stay in water really at this point. That's not a consistent trait for him yet. Most of his consistent traits develop in the Silver Age. Aquaman, sovereign of the seven seas, he keeps getting more power. He needs to be stopped. Says goodbye to his many friends from the ocean depths. Fellows, I'm leaving the ocean. For a while, that is. See, these are the denizens of the deep. They're all sea creatures. There's a dark story lurking out there where this version of Aquaman is just an unstable, lonely young man who's been damaged because of the upbringing that his father forced upon him. I need to be stopped. Where are all these edgy stories coming from? Now, despite his father being a famous undersea explorer, apparently that didn't extend to any knowledge of the undersea life. He was too busy doing things like creating the underwater Uberman. Now, because of this, Aquaman actually gets hurt by one of the fish under the ocean and decides that he's gonna go and learn so that he can actually know what's going on around him. The ocean's too big for a man to learn all about it from his own experience, so I've decided to go to college to study about fish. The reason that I'm telling you this is because in order to go up to the land of man and study, he needs an alias. And oh, what an alias he comes up with. Because remember, his dad actually just called him Aquaman. Later, in clothes which hide his familiar figure. You mean his costume? Aquaman enters Weston College as Mr. Waterman. See, I'm making it sound less obvious by even pronouncing it like that. Let's go, Mr. Waterman. In this story, he's not given a first name, but later, years later, he's gonna be called Adam Waterman. What, me? Aquaman? No. I have glasses, and I'm wearing a red sweater. I don't even know why he bothered with this alias, because he's not even trying to hide that hard. He explains who he is when he shows off the swim team. 15 minutes underwater. Pinch me, somebody. The explanation is simple, Coach. You see, I'm Aquaman, but I'm a bona fide student, so I'm eligible for the team. Aquaman? Now I know I'm dreaming. So if he was gonna be this casual about it, he could have just enrolled under his own name. First name Aqua, last name Man, Mr. Man. He even competes in the swim meets in costume. The thing is, he doesn't have really consistent love interest or people he has to worry about getting hurt or friends. Now, this college thing was a blip. It is not consistent. By the next issue, it's a naval battle and maybe time travel story. Aquaman during this era had a lot of adventures, but not really any established mythos around him. Most of those things are introduced in the Silver Age. His sidekick, his wife, even consistently named animal creatures who followed him or were around with him or who helped him. But the Silver Age Aquaman also sometimes just had his own off-the-cuff adventures, and so because of that, because they don't dwell on any of the specifics that make Golden Age Aquaman different, one could read some of those older stories and have no idea that this was actually a different version of the character. The new backstory that signifies the official changeover to the Silver Age Aquaman is in Adventure Comics 260 in 1959. But this was after he'd already begun to move into a Silver Age direction. The feel and tone of his adventures were starting to be different. They were starting to introduce some of his supports. He'd gotten his first undersea companion partner, an octopus, in issue 229, that's Topo. And by that point, he was already going by the Green Gloves, which were introduced in issue 211 in 1955. But in the revised origin, he had the yellow gloves. So it's because Aquaman starts to change so slowly and subtly at points that people do things like prefer the gloves. Some people just count the origin story as the new debut, but others feel that that's not fair because that's a flashback and you already have things that were part of his new expanded lore before that. His powers take some time to change too, even after the Silver Age has started. However, one can see why the Silver Age version overtook the gold. There was just more to that Aquaman. Original Aquaman didn't even stick to having an alias or anything. The Golden Age Aquaman had a core concept, but wasn't very built out past that. However, this version was revisited in All-Star Squadron issues 59 and 60 in 1986. So the Crisis on Infinite Earths era, right before all of that information was going to be erased, or rather rolled into one timeline. And so because of that, some characters are going to be canceled out, and Golden Age Aquaman was clearly going to be one of them. He already practically had been. Side note, he had a cameo appearance in All-Star Squadron 31, and his belt buckle is green, not yellow. The scandal. But he fully appears in the aforementioned issues. But because of this, it made it seem like there were two Aquamen then, or rather that there was an Aquaman on Earth 1 and Earth 2 and that they were different. Something that seems at points in DC history that some may have been confused by. People tend to cite Adventure Comics 461 when it comes to that because there's a page where they're explaining the way the different Earths work, and they put Aquaman and Dr. Fate as examples of unique characters. However, if Dr. Fate is the example of the unique character for Earth 2, which is the Golden Age Earth, then that would make Aquaman the example for Earth 1, but that's the Silver Age Earth. But that would mean that the creator had forgotten, or the editorial had forgotten, that Aquaman was originally a Golden Age character, if you read it that way, which is how I read it. If so, that happened under Paul Levitz's tenure. Paul Levitz is a name you may remember from the Bat embargo, which was the fact that you couldn't use characters across different mediums because it was confusing. If that's the case, then you can see that confusion was something that potentially happened. Maybe I'm who's confused. This is one of those things where it's easy to fall down a canon rabbit hole because of poor phrasing, and maybe people forgetting. But at the end of the day, it's not the hugest deal out there. I mean, unless you're Adam Waterman. Nobody cares about Adam Waterman. Now there's gonna be people in the comments. I care. He's my favorite Aquaman. The Silver Age Aquaman was Arthur Curry, half Atlantean with a backstory that evolved towards him being ruler of Atlantis. He was raised on land and then would go there later. So the whole ruler of the seas thing was actually attached to something, people to rule, not just the fish. So there's a little more Namor in that version, but there's still differences. And also Namor was not as much in use when the new Aquaman backstory was implemented. It was pre his firm reintroduction during the rise of Marvel in the 1960s. Before that, he had faded out when superheroes fell out of fashion, and Atlas had tried to revive him a little bit, but it hadn't stuck. That was during the 1950s. So he wasn't exactly a big prominent character at the time. Now post-Crisis, the focus was on and had remained on the Silver Age Aquaman. That is until 2022, there was a brief resurgence of the Golden Age one, or at least he was acknowledged. Firstly in Flashpoint Beyond #6, and then in the new Golden Age special. This was an event that was meant to firmly reintroduce the JSA. That is the Justice Society of America, and also rewrite some of what had happened in the Golden Age with some new inserts and continuity. And that meant that there were some tweaks to DC canon history. And because of this series introduced the idea that there had been two Aquamen on the same Earth, basically. And that the Golden Age one was a reclusive, mysterious one who didn't appear too much. He gets an introductory page with art by Jerry Ordway. And in it, they run down his backstory, which is kept largely the same. It's just that the events are streamlined and ordered. They also add a few more details here, like calling him Adam Waterman or naming some of his sharks. It describes him as clashing with maritime criminals and preferring to work alone, not being able to control sea creatures but working with them, and strength that mimicked Atlanteans but through training. Now, did this need to be there? A reintroduction to the concept that there was a Golden Age Aquaman, an Aquaman before Arthur Curry? Not really, but it's a nice nod and acknowledgement of the history. But if one thinks about it too hard, it may raise some questions. Like, did Arthur model his costume off of the Golden Age version? Was he aware of it? Or was it just a case of intense parallel thought? Still, it's nice that the fact that this was a separate character hasn't been forgotten, even though they could fairly easily be rolled into one. There's not much to be gained by keeping up with the Golden Age Aquaman, although one could do something with those stories. One might have to work at it, but there's stuff one could do. The question is if it would be worth it and if people would want to. The story I keep thinking of is really dark. He just seems really lonely. He's just down there, forced to live in this way that other people can't. If it wasn't going to go really dark, there's one thing I would have loved to see more of, and that's the adventures of Adam Waterman. And the world's laziest alias that he didn't even really need. Golden Age Aquaman DC finest release when? People are asking. It's me, I'm the people. It's always interesting to go back to the Golden Age because it's such a fascinating time for the evolution of the characters and seeing what elements are being pulled and put together to try and make them stick. And Aquaman's evolution is so slow and the second version so firmly supplants the first that it's just interesting to go back and see what was going on in that time period. But those are just my thoughts and I want to hear yours. Perhaps you thought it is entirely not very interesting or that it does need to be thought of or does need to be revisited. We can just completely forget about Golden Age Aquaman. What do you think? I want to hear your thoughts. Did you know about Golden Age Aquaman? Did you know that they were different from each other? Yellow or green gloves? What would you do with Adam Waterman if he were to return? Share your thoughts down below, and while you're down there, please do all YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking this time out of your day spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.